Any release of Hamas terrorists means that we're going to be facing terrorism once again. And we've had these exchanges in the past, and every single time we've paid with human lives. The Prime Minister has to weigh, this really very difficult decision about releasing the hostages on the one hand, in return for their terrorists. Exactly.
We have a deal. We have a hostage deal. Good evening and welcome to the Rosenberg Report. As things are moving quickly now, just hours before, President Donald Trump takes office again, he said there would be hell to pay if Hamas didn't release all the hostages. But there is a deal now. It is dramatic. And in a moment, we're going to talk to one of the women who was an Israeli hostage and whose husband is in Gaza, and Lord willing, he is about to be released. We're going to get to that. We're also going to show you a little bit of my interview with the new Israeli ambassador, Yechiel Leiter. But first, let's talk about what do we know at this hour about this dramatic hostage deal. It was President-elect Trump on Wednesday who first told the world the deal was done, writing on his Truth Social account. Soon, President Biden confirmed it in White House remarks to the press. All day Thursday, Israel and Hamas continued arguing over precise final language, but as best as we can tell, here are the basic contours of the deal. Phase 1, 33 Israeli hostages will be released, including children, women, the injured, and men over 50, including Keith Siegel, a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. A ceasefire will begin at noon on Sunday and last for 42 days. The IDF will begin staged withdrawals to the perimeter of Gaza, but not completely evacuate Gaza. And Israel will start releasing Palestinian terrorists, 30 terrorists for every live hostage and 50 for every female Israeli soldier. Phase 2. On day 16, Israel and Hamas will negotiate final terms to release all male IDF soldiers. The IDF will also begin allowing Palestinians to go back to their homes in northern Gaza after clearing through checkpoints to make sure they don't have weapons. Phase 3. If Israel and Hamas can agree to another round of negotiations, then Hamas will return the bodies of all dead hostages, and Israel will reportedly fully withdraw from Gaza. Not every Israeli is happy. Someone could still blow up the deal on either side, but that's where we are so far. Now, I just spoke to the new incoming Israeli ambassador to the United States, Dr. Yechiel Leiter. This was his first interview on any Israeli or American outlet. Let's take a look at what he says about, when I asked him, do you think that President Trump's demand that Hamas release all the hostages prior to January 20th, how has that changed the dynamic? Take a look at what he said. At a moment where, as you and I record this, suddenly, we've gone from feeling like almost no chance of a hostage deal to suddenly there's a lot of talk that a deal is about to be done. Now, we want to temper that. Things can go in any direction. But what can you tell us about the Prime Minister's approach and his red lines on making a deal and the impact of President-elect Trump's very forceful and repeated statements there will be hell to pay if Hamas does not release all these hostages by January 20th?
I want to talk about the Prime Minister's attitude towards negotiations with Hamas and what our security concerns are in the context of those negotiations. But I'll start with the last thing you said, Joel, because I think it's perhaps the most important. When President-elect Trump said there's going to be hell to pay if those hostages aren't released, I think it goes to the depth of understanding of what we're dealing with. The hostages are living in hell. And to say that there's going to be hell to pay means that there's recognition that holding people hostage is simply not something that's acceptable. This goes back.
It's almost been normalized.
It's almost been normalized. We're negotiating with an organization that grabs people out of their bedrooms, men, women, and children, elderly and the sickly, and holds them in tunnels underground. Let's appreciate this. Some of these tunnels are 40, 50 meters, yards underground. They can
I've taken our audience into those tunnels.
You've seen them. They can barely breathe. Yeah. They're dungeons, really. Yeah. You can't stand up straight. And some of them have been there, most of them who are still there have been there for over a year, well over a year and a quarter. Longer than the amount of time that the American hostages were held in the embassy in Tehran. And the Iranians at the time, Khomeini's regime was afraid of Ronald Reagan entering the White House. And it was that night of the inauguration that the Iranian government released the American hostages just in anticipation of Reagan entering the White House. And I think that there's anticipation now of President Trump entering the White House and the ramifications of holding people, human beings, in hell. I mean, this is a concept in the Ten Commandments that's discussed. Not to steal includes not stealing people and holding them hostage.
What significance would you put on President Trump's repeated and very bold statements? Has it, in fact, changed the dynamic? Suddenly, we're all talking about a possible hostage deal when it felt like months and months and months were going by with almost no talk about it at all.
So here it's very important for us to appreciate the ramifications of a deal with the Hamas terror organization and the concerns of the Prime Minister. He's really facing a Solomonic decision here, because any release of Hamas terrorists means that we're going to be facing terrorism once again. And we've had these exchanges in the past, and every single time we've paid with human lives. The Prime Minister has to weigh, this really very difficult decision about releasing the hostages on the one hand, and knowing that in the future,
getting the prisoners released,
getting our hostages released, right?
In return for
their terrorists, exactly. So and it's also. It includes the issues of our border security. Are these terrorists going back into the very same area from which they already fired missiles onto our civilians, into the areas from which they already took the hostages? I know Prime Minister Netanyahu for over 30 years, and I know his sensitivity towards human suffering. And I know how much he cares about the hostages, but he cares about every Israeli as well, and he cares about every soldier as well. And that's why there has to be this proper balance that only a real leader can weigh and take ultimately. So it's a very, very difficult decision. He's doing it in a measured and careful fashion, and he's already released over half the hostages, some of them alive, unfortunately some of them no longer alive. But I believe that he's pursuing, and some rescues, of course, which were also very difficult decisions. You're sending special ops into these tunnels to remove and secure the release of these hostages. So these were very difficult decisions. The Prime Minister is uniquely positioned to make these difficult decisions. And I think the vast majority of Israelis who have repeatedly expressed their support for Prime Minister Netanyahu will support a deal that he brings and know that it's the best deal that we can get under the circumstances.
You lost your oldest son fighting in Gaza as a Special Forces Reserve officer. How does the weight of that affect how you see the Prime and how the Prime Minister sees his decision-making process?
Well, it's a very personal microcosm of what the entire Israeli civilian population is facing by sending their sons into the field of battle. My son David was a soldier of my oldest son's, Moshe's company. And as they were entering Gaza, David went up to Moshe and said, the missiles are flying over our heads, the ground is shaking, I'm afraid. And my oldest son, who was the commander, put his arm on his younger brother and said, yeah, I'm afraid too, but let's get in there and save those hostages. Let's bring them home. So that's what everybody's committed to in Israel. We don't leave hostages in the hands of hardened terrorists. And we have risked our lives getting in there to save them, to bring them home. Many soldiers have lost their lives pursuing, my son among them, to bring these hostages home. And one thing is clear. We have to end this entire process with a complete victory over this terrorist organization, a proxy of Iran that's intent on destroying the state of Israel and killing as many Jews as they can.
Ambassador Designate Yechiel Leiter, thank you so much for coming on the Rosenberg Report. I look forward to next week with the full interview.
Thank you, Joel. It's good to be with you.